Hey guys, it's Tim Miller from the Bulwark. I am delighted to be here with, I guess we're calling it fellow YouTuber. I'm still uncomfortable with the title, but maybe you're more comfortable with it. He's the author of The Echo Machine, How Right-Wing Extremism Created a Post-Truth America. It's David Pakman. What's up, man?
Good to be here with you.
I want to get to the book, but first, you had a provocative video, maybe yesterday, titled, I've been warned, do not leave the country. And I want to be upfront. I was like, when I first saw it come across my feed, I was like, okay, let's not scare people unnecessarily. Like, I don't want to overdo it. I do plan to leave the country soon. And so I was like, we could do a funny video. And it's like, Miller, I do plan to leave the country for vacation. Like, not really, not permanently. But as I watched it, I realized your situation is different from mine in a very meaningful way. And so I wanted to talk it through with you, because I think that this is something that people are really kind of trying to process and do threat assessment on. And so I just figured we'd work it out. So for people who've not seen the video, give a little summary of why your situation might be a little unique.
Well, I was not born in the US, so I'm a naturalized US citizen. I've had citizenship 20 something years, but this is a new world in which naturalized citizens have now been stopped and harassed or intimidated at the border, been asked and told to turn over devices. There was a story of a lawyer coming over, I think it was in Vermont, from Canada back to the United States, a crossing I've done, 30 times growing up, going to Montreal to visit, and I've family in Canada that I visit. And so the casual warning I got from immigration lawyers who don't know each other, but they all know me, is I might not go outside of the country over the next couple of months. Hopefully things are not going to escalate with these detentions. And I'm using the term detention not as in you're suspected of a crime, but just, at the border, we're investigating. You're not free to go right now.
Yeah. Get brought to a room.
And then if you do go, make sure you know exactly which lawyer you would call if you have a problem. Like, don't make it a sort of, I want a lawyer, because it's a different situation when you're crossing the border. It's know exactly who it is that you would call if that happens. And I think it's a reasonable sort of warning given what's going on right now.
So, I mean, do you feel like, are you adjusting your plans potentially? I mean, like, do you think that people should? I don't know. I mean, you're getting, not everybody knows multiple immigration lawyers, so like you've had those conversations. After hearing from them, your takeaway is that it's like a pretty legitimate thing to be concerned about for green card holders, naturalized citizens, people.
Yeah. And I would add, because I have such a public presence criticizing the administration, I do think that I'm at more risk than a random naturalized citizen, probably. And part of it is also like, there's not really the capacity to do to every naturalized citizen re-entering the United States what happened to these few people. So I think it's just sort of it's what I would call a low probability but high impact event if something like this were to happen. And so I just want to have a plan. I don't know about adjusting my plans right now, but it's definitely something I'm talking about with my family.
Yeah. You don't think, because again, like, I just sort of processing this, like, in the shoes of most, well, not, we've got a lot of foreign viewers on YouTube, obviously, but like for people that are born in America, American citizens, like at this point, they've hassled some American citizens. Like there's an example, there's like a lawyer of a asylee, was hassled. There was the case we were talking about on another video about a kid in Arizona who's coming from New Mexico, but had kind of a learning disability. And there is a he said about, what ICE is saying. He said he was from Mexico. Seems preposterous, but so there are a couple of those situations. But like for actual American citizens at this point, I guess I think it's important for people who do have the privilege of not having an acute concern right now, that they do not either A, feel like they're imprisoned, or B, more importantly, feel like they shouldn't go and speak out and go to protests and all that. Like, do you have a similar kind of threat assessment to that?
Absolutely. And, this is, if you study 20th century authoritarianism, you start to see similarities, which is One is creating an environment in which people self-censor and say, I'm not going to go to a protest, or I'm not going to put my name to a certain statement publicly. And then the fact that people are doing that can manufacture the idea that there's more consent for those in power than there actually is, which further emboldens them to
Right.
try and to get away with more. So it's the last thing that I would want to encourage people to do.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's crazy that we're here, though,
It
isn't
is.
it? Even having to have the conversation
Yeah.
is kind of insane. I think it's important to have it in a and you're a very measured guy in a measured way, because I mean, just on Fox the other day, Will Kane was out there going like, these crazy people over at the Bulwark, like they think that Lily from the Upper West Side is the Gestapo is going to bang down her door, and I'm saying like, no, like we don't, like you don't want to also give them that fig leaf to be able to like paint
Right.
people as crazy. Like there's a broad actually consensus in this country from you to Joe Rogan that's like they shouldn't do that. They shouldn't be pulling people off the street without due process. They shouldn't be hassling citizens, right, unnecessarily. And the broader we can make that coalition, the better, I think.
I agree. And the other thing that I've also been kind of careful of is I'm very honest with my audience. When there is a slippery slope asserted incorrectly, I think it's really important that we recognize that. So like if we go back 10, 15 years and we think about the folks who were lobbying against gay marriage, who would say, if two men can get married, next thing you know, people will be able to marry horses. And it's like,
Right.
well, hold on a second. Horses can't sign contracts. That doesn't make any sense. That's not a slippery slope that we need to worry about. That's a terrible argument.
Yeah.
We are
There are a
seeing
couple
here,
thruples out there now.
we are seeing here that it was supposedly so-called criminal illegals, and then it was, well, maybe it's anyone who's undocumented, and
Right.
maybe it's visa holders, maybe it's green card holders, maybe it's naturalized U.S. citizens. So we're seeing a progression here that we didn't see with the marrying horses stuff, right? And so I think it's important to assert that as well.
For sure. Okay, let's get to the book. The Echo Machine. For folks not familiar with it, just give us a little, little Reader's Digest summary, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, so 3 main points. You don't really need to read the book if you hear the 3 points, right?
Okay, but you should get it anyway.
Point number 1, Trump is really a consequence or an end result. He's like the coal at the end of the rainbow rather than the catalyst for a lot of what's going on. So we trace that story dating back to opposition to the civil rights movement. That's point number 1. Point number 2, the dearth in critical thinking, media literacy, and epistemology is really a plague in the US that has significantly accelerated the ability of misinformation and disinformation to spread. So it's sort of like advocating that we've got to put this stuff back in school curricula, probably when kids are like 8 years old. Seems like a reasonable place to me.
How's your kid? I got a
Sorry?
7-year-old. She's about ready for it, I think.
I agree. And we actually look at, in Finland, it's so depressing, but not only are the 8-year-olds good at critical thinking in Finland, their Spanish as a second language is so good that they can do the critical thinking class in Spanish. It's so depressing to see. I mean, it's just, it's night and day what's going on over there. And then number 3, that a lot of the problems that the US is facing, that we are often told we're too big of a country or too diverse of a country to solve these problems, they've actually been solved in a lot of different parts of the world. And so it's sort of like a tour through political successes as well.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that you broaden that out quite a bit beyond kind of just the right wing echo chamber part, and describing it like that. And I'm glad you did, because I want to get to the right wing crazies in a second. But like, having done the research on this, having looked at other countries, when you're assessing the damage here, like obviously some of it, right, is Fox and the right wing echo chamber, but some of it is also technology, right? Like some of it is also cultural things that are happening in the country. So like, how do you, when you're kind of reflecting on it, like how much do you point at those guys are bad, and like how much is it other like bigger issues we need to resolve?
It's a lot of other bigger issues. I mean, there's no doubt that I have a perspective and a political bias that's mine,
Yeah.
but I'm really looking more broadly. I mean, just to give you one example, there's a Pew study I talk about in the book about whether people can distinguish fact and opinion. Because even before we argue as to what the facts are, can we even tell whether we're talking about fact or opinion?
Yeah.
And Pew did this study where it gave people 10 statements like chocolate ice cream is the best, which we would know, of course, is an opinion. Most people agree it's an opinion. And like Democrats are slightly better at figuring out the in this study the opinions versus the facts, but like not really by that much. You know,
Yeah.
it's like it's clearly a country issue that we have here. So a lot of the the policy ideas I favor are certainly more associated with the political left than the right. But the
Yeah.
problem as I diagnose it is a much broader than just a right wing problem in this country.
Yeah, the fact versus opinion thing is funny. I was just talking to somebody yesterday who was, there is an increasingly familiar, as a former Republican, comment I hear from folks on the left who are consumers of media. They're like, oh, the mainstream media is terrible. Like they're out to get us. Like we gotta, we have to push back on them. And there's areas where I agree with that and areas where I disagree. But like an important part of this is this distinction, actually, the opinion versus fact. I was saying to this person yesterday, I said, the New York Times, I might not love the way they handle Donald Trump, right? And I might not love all the opinions in the opinion section, but like their reporting on the health outcomes in Africa is like pretty fucking good, And David Pakman and Tim and whoever, we're not, and Bulwark, and like we're not. That's not in our remit, And so we can't like totally throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I don't know, as somebody who's like kind of in this as like an independent media person, like how do you sort of navigate that kind of question about the critique of the mainstream media versus like the need for fact-based journalism?
Well, it really goes to a side that the best of corporate media is the most underfunded part that we're kind of losing, which is
Right.
the investigative journalism,
Yeah.
because it's much easier to sit in an office rewriting stuff someone else has done than to actually go out and do the work. So yeah, I think you can kind of do a critique that recognizes the influence of advertisers and the need for revenue, while at the same time recognizing that there is investigative journalism that is difficult to do as an individual with no budget and no resources. And so that some of these legacy media outlets are also better positioned to carry it out. But that at the same time, you might not agree with the editorial page. We need to be able to do a more kind of holistic critique of the environment and then layer on top of it how the salacious stuff is much more likely to be shared and reshared because of algorithmic reasons than a good piece of investigative journalism about something happening in the Congo, for example. So these are multiple layers to it.
Yeah. What about going back to the solutions on or any of the ones that you go into cover the tech side of it? I mean, obviously there's an education problem, as you mentioned, but to me, like having been in the right wing echo chamber for a while, I kind of was there as the internet and the phones were emerging, right? Like I had my first job in politics. It was like basically there's conservative talk radio, and Fox was around, but like the consumers of it, they might have watched Fox some. It was kind of before the zombie Fox watchers had really started, and they might have listened to Rush, but at night they watched Dan Rather, or they watched their local news anchor, and now those same people, are fully subsumed by like a right wing ecosystem in their phone, and it's like they're not getting any regular. And so to me, like the technology really hypercharged this. Something that was like maybe a little problem in 1999 or whatever. There's like a big problem now. So anyway, what's your view of that? And are there any kind of technological solutions that have happened to other places that you think are interesting?
I delve into that a little bit. It's actually going to be essentially the total topic for my second book, which I'm starting to work on. So,
Exciting.
check with me in a year
Well,
and
we
a
can
half,
work
I
it
guess.
out live. We can we're sort
I
of
mean,
drafting it right now.
there's, this is another area where it's very easy for left and right to end up in algorithmic echo chambers. So there's a bipartisan aspect to that.
Yeah.
More pointedly, though, we did see in recent elections that benefited the Republican Party more insofar as narratives that were untrue but beneficial to the Republican candidate did spread more on platforms, including Facebook and others. That recent study in November found that TikTok was the only platform that was politically sort of 50-50. I think in terms of the politics, it was like 54-46 leaning to what are traditionally considered like more left aligned views. But all the other platforms, like we know Facebook, if we're on it, we've seen what's happened with X, YouTube in Q1 2025, the left is actually growing more quickly, but that's the first time that that's ever happened. We know that most of these platforms really have been dominated by the right. And the reasons for that, including the funding of it, I talk about extensively in the book.
Yeah. So let's hear a little bit more.
Well, if you go back to when the first the origins of right wing radio go back to religious groups starting to buy
Mhm.
up low power FM and also AM licenses, which were then consolidated into right wing radio networks. That, even though it feels very distant from like Turning Point USA and the Daily Wire and
Yeah.
PragerU, it's sort of the inkling that first said there's a reason that is it's a really good idea to pour money into this stuff. And what we're seeing now is that there's just no equivalent on the political left to what some of these networks have been able to build. And they've done it straight through. Like, this is pre-Reagan throughout, Fox launching in 96, and then some of these new on campus and online groups. They're just more willing to fund it, where for whatever reason, and it's sort of a topic maybe for its own discussion, the left has not been willing to pour money in the same way.
Yeah. So when you kind of assess then the problem of what is happening on the right, I mean, we're not going to be able to unwind it, right? And as you're kind of alluding to, the left or the pro democracy movement, whatever you want to call it, could build their own echo chamber, and there's value in that, though it's not a solution in itself, right? And so, like, is there a puncturing? What do you think about the idea of puncturing their echo chamber? And maybe that is unpleasant, but something that is something that people should do. I mean, I saw Pete Buttigieg was on this Andrew Schultz kind of bro podcaster
Yep.
today. I think it was or yesterday, and I already saw it like while I was like sitting in traffic. I already saw on TikTok like some lefty TikToker like criticizing Pete for going on that, right? And so there's I think a genuine view maybe from some people like you shouldn't do that. Like that is only helping their echo chamber. It's only validating it. On the other hand, if it's like going to exist and it's creating all these problems, like maybe that's the best of the bad solutions. I don't know. What make you of that question?
I tend to lean towards the latter. And I think actually the key is, we kind of have like a pretty low glass ceiling in the overtly political space, because no matter how many of us do the overtly political thing that we're doing, a lot of the country just doesn't consume this type of content.
Right.
They're not going to consume the overtly political podcasts or watch the overtly political YouTube shows. So actually reaching the what I call blue coded sociocultural spaces is critical. When Trump showed up and did the Nelk Boys for however many hours he did it, he told a lie every 15 seconds, but it did not matter because it was unstructured and authentic in a way that resonated with people and did much more to help him than the fact that he told 4 lies a minute did to hurt him, because that was sort of like already baked in. And a lot of these spaces have become red coded. If you go on TikTok, if you're looking up how to wholesale houses or how to be a better car salesperson or fitness stuff, 90% of it is red coded, where it might not be overtly part of the subject matter, but it's like these are kind of right wingers. They're sort of loosely in the MAGA sphere. The left needs that. And I don't know exactly, I'm in an overtly political space, so I don't know exactly who does it, but
Yeah.
I think that that's critical.
Could not agree with that more. What do you make of the Gavin strategy? I think slightly different than what I was saying with Pete because he's hosting people on his own platform.
My reaction after the first episode was, I don't know that I totally understand the play, even if the idea is to set himself up as more moderate for a 2028 presidential run. Like, let's assume that that's what it is, which many of my viewers believe that it is. I don't know if what there is to gain by hosting Charlie Kirk in a sort of pseudo friendly manner and conceding quite a bit. I don't know if the moderates he will gain will supersede what he stands to lose. Since that first episode, I'm now sort of open to the idea that maybe he does know what he's doing. I just don't know. It's
Yeah.
I have to acknowledge that
Nobody knows what they're doing is a pretty good baseline,
maybe no one
actually.
knows what they're
Yeah.
doing. Right. As someone who's in this space, I acknowledge that my view on how the average voter will be affected by this stuff is probably completely warped. So
Yeah.
I'm open to the idea that this is potentially a disaster and potentially brilliant.
What do you think is the most pernicious thing in the right wing echo chamber of the time that you spent analyzing it?
Well, I think it's the speed with which the mis and disinformation spreads completely uncritically and the complete lack of a desire to correct it, where I don't want to pretend that the left goes out of its way to correct everything that it gets wrong. But there is a little bit more of a resistance to continue spreading a knowingly false narrative.
There's some shame. There's
You know,
definitely
I
more
mean,
shame.
even when we saw, like, for example, with the Abrego Garcia story, where some of the facts were just wrong, or like they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs, that whole thing.
Yeah.
They just kept going with it, no matter how much the facts pointed in another direction.
No, it starts to become funny. Actually, they start to become it's like a knowing joke, wink and nod by for the content creators, where they will
Yes.
keep saying the lie, wink, and like the consumers. My assessment is like maybe half of them are in on the joke, and like half of them still think it's real, or maybe
Yeah.
worse than that, honestly.
That's right. And then they also when we would send correspondence to Trump rallies during the campaign, Luke Beasley was one that would do it. He would ask people, hey, what's your reaction to when Trump said if he decides he should suspend the Constitution, that he should be allowed to do it? They go, he never said that.
Yeah.
And he would be ready. He would pull out the Troth Central post and show it to them. And they would go, no, that's clearly Photoshopped. That's been doctored. You just could not get through. You could not get through.
Yeah. Do you have if you want to know what's happening in the echo chamber, do you have a favorite? Do you have a guilty pleasure in the right-wing echo chamber?
You know, I really don't. I really don't.
No guilty pleasures.
I don't consider myself a connoisseur.
Yeah, got it. Okay. So, all right. What,
when Jordan Peterson breaks down sobbing over either a misunderstanding or something completely inconsequential, maybe that would be the guilty pleasure.
It is fun to watch Jordan Peterson cry. All right. I think that's a good place to leave it. David, thanks for popping on. Everybody go check out the book, The Echo Machine. And, check out his YouTube. And, we'll be chatting.
Thank you.